Welcome back. It's at night, and we are here is the second part of the decolonization little mini unit. As we keep going through the Cold War in Unit 8, after this, we spend some time in the Middle East, and then we see if South America and Latin America can kind of stabilize in the 20th century, and then we end Chapter 8 and move on to Chapter 9. So let's go. All right. Decolonization in Africa. Africa, by the way, in case you're wondering, because some of you might be, it's over here. That's Africa. Okay. So anyway, moving on. African independence. So this unit, we're going to be looking at the various, not every single African country, obviously, but we're going to be looking at some that you've worked on in that assignment this week, some that you've heard of, hopefully some that you haven't. Now, between the India and the Southeast Asian unit was pretty simple. There weren't that many countries, but this unit or this section of notes will be going through a lot of countries, and I think some of the biggest takeaways are to look at similarities and differences in the independence movements with respect to how they achieved independence, with respect to how they, like what kind of government was set up after independence was gained, how the colonizers reacted. Did they all act the same? Some of the questions I was asking you on the assignment today, I think you just need to follow those through in this PowerPoint to just, again, kind of help you develop context and understand something that's this large a scope. So the African independence movements arose after the World Wars. Africans, if you remember, Africans fought for the mother countries. And they were led by intellects educated in the West. So, again, these are now little tiny, these are all extra Englands and extra Frances. And so some of the more elite are going to have the benefit of education. And those educated people are going to be the ones who fill the void of the imperializers, one would hope. African discontent over conditions fueled movements, working conditions, the way the Europeans treated them, this idea of racial superiority. All these things began to motivate the native Africans to rebel, to seek their independence. Blaise Danier and W.E.B. Du Bois. There was this Pan-African conference held between the two world wars, led by an American and a Senegalese man, looking at the influence and the importance of Africa and Africanism. In the conference demands the immediate unconditional agreement of independence to all African peoples and the total evacuation of foreign forces of aggression and oppression stationed in Africa. These would be necessary. Goes on to say, denounces vigorously the policy of racial discrimination applied by colonialist and race-conscious minorities. It proclaims equality of rights for all citizens of the free countries of Africa and the close association of the masses for the building up and administration of free and prosperous Africa. It calls on people of Africa to intensify the struggle for independence. So this is, yes, there are multiple Africans, but they want them to think as one large body. The African leaders made little progress towards independence until the Fifth Congress in 1945. And again, and we'd spoken this earlier, the war is over, and the Second War is over. And if the country was struggling economically after the first, then they're definitely struggling after the second. Britain and France hoped to maintain profitable ties with the African colonies, so they invested in infrastructure, they invested in education. So don't know if they initially were on board with independence, but the one thing they were on board with was not losing the cow, so to speak. So they want to keep those economic ties for the very obvious reasons. African economies remain weak and dependent on the mother country Basically, because what they're producing, there's no industrialization there, primarily agricultural. So they're producing raw material, they're producing cash crops for the current former mother country, and they are unable to take that revenue and reinvest it in their own infrastructure. So they're always going to be behind. So long as this relationship stays in place. One of the first people we're going to talk about, Ghana, formerly the Gold Coast, became the first independent black African country, led by an American educated man, Kwame Nkrumah, or Nkrumah. I apologize to his family. That's the flag. It goes from that to that. And the significance of the colors would be interesting to know. He relied on civil disobedience, nonviolent strikes, and boycotts to oppose British rule. And there he is with Dr. King Jr. It's also 57, so I'm sure he knows of Gandhi. The best way of learning to be an independent sovereign state is to be an independent sovereign state. We prefer self-government with danger to servitude and tranquility. So in other words, you can't make an omelet if you don't break any eggs. And you can be safe at home and never eat an omelet, but omelets are pretty good. And then sometimes you just break eggs. All right. He supported Pan-Africanism, which is promoting unity of culture and ideas across Africa with no European intervention. So make it a truly African multi-state system. The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with total liberation of the African continent. Africa is one continent, one people, and one nation. The notion that in order to have a nation, it is necessary for there to be a common language, a common territory, and a common culture has failed to stand the test of time, or the scrutiny of scientific definition of objective reality. The community of economic life is the major feature within a nation, and it is the economy which holds together the people living in a territory. It is on this basis that the new Africans recognize themselves as potentially one nation, whose dominion is the entire African continent. Now, I had heard the term Pan-Africanism. I had no idea that it was during this time it was this sweeping. And the idealistic potential is just the economic potential is just staggering if they could have harnessed all the different groups. But I think we know it would have been difficult. He founded the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, further Pan-African goals and encouraging the end of colonialism. I got a cramp. And there is an African Union still to this day that works kind of like the OAS, which is the Organization of American States over in Central and South America. He claimed dictatorial powers and was accused of economic corruption, a pattern seen in subsequent African dictatorships. That's what's the thing about power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, or money as well. That's the statue of the man after a coup. So there was a coup in 1967. Ghana did not experience a peaceful election again until 2000. And this right here is a trend that you will see repeatedly in African history. Consistent, like the only thing consistent in their governance in a lot of places is turnover. And as I've stated earlier, and as we've seen earlier, and as you've read earlier, political stability is essential for economic development and then ultimately the growth and success and the health of the people in your country. Here comes the next one. Anybody know where we are? Anybody? I can't hear you, but anyway. Britain granted independence to Nigeria, but the nation's borders forced three hostile groups together, the Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo. So again, this goes back to the issues early on when these countries are formed, that natural tribal, for lack of a better word, areas are subsumed by these superimposed borders, and now groups who would not peacefully coexist were forced to coexist, and the only reason they were peacefully coexisting is because there was the imperial country keeping things in order. And then what you see there are, again, in the map, it'll come to scale in a second. These are the linguistic groups. So these are the language groups in Nigeria. And again, one of the reasons that countries have official languages is so that, well, the main reason is so that the laws are all written in one language so everybody understands them, or the policies or anything having to do with a country and its development is in a language so that they all know. But when you're this diverse, excuse me, how can you talk to anybody? I mean, you know what I mean. The Muslim Hausa tribe dominates the north. The Christian Igbo and Yoruba tribes control the south. So now not only do we have a linguistic difference, we have religious difference, and I'm sure cultural differences. In 1966, the Hausa-controlled government massacred 20,000 Igbo. The Igbo attempted to form a separate country of Biafra, and so their secession movement was met with resistance. A civil war between the Hausa and Igbo left over 1 million dead in a 3-year period. And again, war makes it very difficult to develop economically. War makes it very difficult to develop infrastructure for the obvious reasons is that your labor force is dying. Farmland and cropland gets potentially destroyed through fire and other means. War, when it's in your home, on your homeland, is really, really bad for all sorts of reasons. And I think that's a trend that we could look at is how many of these African states go through this constant cycle of revolution and civil war and then flounder to develop. The ethnic and religious tensions seen in Nigeria occurred in many other African nations after decolonization, largely due to the fact that they had no roadmap. Jomo Kenyatta led the independence movement in Kenya. He represented the Kikuyu people who were driven off their lands by settlers. When the British missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, we had the land. They had the land, and we had the Bible. Between 52 and 60, the Kikuyu turned violent during the Mau Mau uprising. Kenyatta was imprisoned by British troops. Even though he was a moderate, he was still in prison because he was, I'm assuming, viewed as a troublemaker. And we can't have that. We are determined to have independence in peace, and we shall not allow hooligans to rule Kenya. We must have no hatred towards one another. Mau Mau was a disease which had been eradicated and must never be remembered again. So they recognize that this could not continue and this could not go on. We're going to go to Kenya because, why not? Go to the east coast of Africa. Kenya was given independence and Kenyatta became president. Soon he had complete control of Kenya. And again, here are the African states under European control prior to the various independence movements. You have some coming along here, Sierra Leone, others. There's the Empire of Ethiopia. Remember, that was independent until 1935 when our good friend Mussolini and some help from his friends said, you know what, I need some Africa. France gave African colonies choice to remain in the French Empire or independent. Many remained with the French because of the economic benefits, because it was easier, because, well, because of the economic benefits. Not all did, though. The French colony of Algeria began War of Independence. Many French people lived in Algeria, and this made the independence effort a little more complicated. Its position relative to Europe, I'm sure, played a part in it, as well as whatever resources were there. And again, a lot of this stuff, Ghana, maybe Kenya, definitely Algeria, were in that assignment. So this may help you add a few more finishing touches or give you a little more insight into what was going on. Independence movement led by the National Liberation Front, the FLN, because remember it's French, the Front Libération Nationale, which used guerrilla tactics to fight the French. Again, that's also a trend in independence movements, is to not fight the traditional army by traditional means. The ideology is primarily Algerian nationalist. It essentially drew its political self-legitimization from three sources: nationalism, socialism, and Islam. And I'm assuming, I think it's safe to assume that because of the Islamic leg in that tripod, they saw themselves as separate groups from the French Algerians. They granted independence. Intense violence breaks out in Algeria as the FLN forces killed, lots of French. The dictator Houari Boumediene was the dictator until 1978. They established a dictatorship and military overthrows. Religious tensions between Muslims and Christians intensified. So in Algeria, there's one of those areas. This is I think when we get to the Southwest Asia, and to a lesser extent the Arab-Israeli conflict, we can see a little bit of the Christian-Muslim part of this and get a little better understanding of why so contentious. Also because of what we spoke of earlier in the course. Angola was independent after a 14-year war with Portugal, and then there was civil war between three different tribes that lasted until 2002. Again, typically what happens in these states, and I don't know all the readings from the assignment, but the colonizing power will choose a group to sort of be the ruling group in these colonies. Sometimes it's the majority group. Sometimes it's a minority group. Sometimes it's a group hostile to one of the other groups. I think it's safe to assume that the European colonizers really didn't do a whole lot of study. They just looked for people who would be loyal to them, because I think those people realize that if they're loyal to the colonizer, they'll be here for as long as the colonizer's here. And then when the colonizers leave, there's that vacuum of power and who's going to be the leader. And all these groups, one, they get a chance to get revenge on the one party who thought they were the king. And then two, all of them see an opportunity to seize control for the country, for their people primarily. And then you see here, each color represents a different ethnic group in Angola. So again, very diverse. And so how do you find common ground there to get a country up and running? In 1956, British forces left the Suez Canal zone, and then Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the canal, made it part of Egypt. A revenue stream, literally, for Egypt. Suez Canal, I missed that one. The Suez Canal is right there along the Sinai Peninsula. We shall defend the Suez Canal with our blood and strength, and we shall meet aggression with aggression and evil with evil. We will defend the grains of sand in the desert to the last drop of our blood. It's their canal. There's Port Said after the Suez Crisis. Anglo-French invasions, as you can see right here. In 1956, the Suez Crisis occurred when Britain, France, and Israel seized the canal. Eventually, forces withdrew and Egypt retained control. And then we get me out of the way. If we sit back while Nasser consolidates his position and gradually acquires control of the oil-bearing countries, he can and is resolved to wreck us. If Middle Eastern oil is denied to us for a year or two, our gold reserves will disappear. If our gold reserves disappear, we should not be able to maintain a force in Germany or indeed anywhere else. I doubt whether we shall be able to pay for the bare minimum necessary for our defense, and a country that cannot provide for its defense is finished. And that's a member of the British government. He's the permanent undersecretary at the Foreign Affairs Office. So he is representing Britain saying, look, if we don't have oil, we're doomed. Oh, look, it's our buddy Nikita. Nasser defied the West by accepting financial aid from the USSR to build the Aswan Dam on the Nile River. Very smart. So Egypt goes the other way. And what this does, too, is it makes, this is all during the Cold War, by the way. Let's not forget this. All these decolonizations are post World War II, which makes them all Cold War activities, which makes them all really important to the West, to capitalist countries, to the United States, and to the Soviet Union, because all these countries, these new countries, are popping up. And who can get in there first? Who can get in there and kind of dictate terms? And and if Khrushchev is now in Egypt, and what's to say? Well, he can start moving across the top of the African continent or down the East Coast. So this is a big deal. All these different countries have a choice to make once they get stable as to how they want to. You saw some of them were capitalists, some were socialists. They have a dictator, which means they're going to be either a corporatist or some sort of command economy. Oh, here's another part of Africa that we all know about. South Africa. In 1910, it was founded. 20% white population dominated the majority black mixed population, denying them basic freedoms. That's right. It's your standard, basic, everyday 20-80 split. The African National Congress formed to protest racist policies. They used violence and civil disobedience and were largely unsuccessful. And again, this is 1913. This is early days of any kind of, civil rights, in a way, movements. Apartheid, which is a segregation of the races, was established in 1948, and it created separate homelands within South Africa and a pass system. You had to have like a pass or a passport to move from one to the other. And this was to regulate movements of blacks. But if you notice the sign, also natives, Indians, and coloreds. If you enter these premises at night, you'll be listed as missing. Armed guards shoot on sight. Savage dogs devour your corpse. You've been warned. And you see all the different Bantu tribes in South Africa. And they all had different homelands, and that's where they had to live. And that's where they had to be at night. Remember, Italy and other places in Europe were doing this in the 1300s and the 1400s with Jewish populations and other populations of actually locking them in at night in their part of town. This is not locked in, but at the same time, it's not much better. And that's what the passes looked like right there. Whenever an authorized officer has reason to believe that any native within an urban area is an idle person in that he's habitually unemployed and has no sufficient honest means of livelihood, he is authorized, he may, without warrant, arrest the native or cause him to be arrested. So if you did not have a job and you were black and African, you were an African, you could be arrested for not having a job. Again, here's another book. When Jim left his Pedi village in the northern Transvaal, remember Transvaal is that area with the Dutch? He had to go to the nearest police station or native affairs department. There he got a trek pass. This permitted him to make the journey to Johannesburg, the capital. On reaching the city, he got an identification pass and a 6-day special pass. He paid 2 shillings each month for the identification pass. The 6-day special was his protection while he looked for work. He did not find work during his first 6 days in the city. He did not go to the pass office to renew his 6-day special. He was picked up on the 8th day and spent 2 weeks in jail as a vagrant. That taught him to get the pass office. That taught him to go to the pass office regularly. He forgot. He was looking for work, and basically his his work visa expired. That's what this is. This 6-day pass is a temporary visa to allow you access to look for work. Apartheid allowed white South Africans to control the nation's government and economy. Nelson Mandela, a leader of the ANC, was imprisoned for agitating strikes and sabotage of property and demonstrations against apartheid, so he went to jail. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal in which I hope to live for and to see realized. But if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. Is there anything that means that much that we've seen this over and over and over in these countries, in Southeast Asian countries? We've seen this over and over and over. Is there anything that makes us feel this way? Resistance to white domination was continuous but unsuccessful. The South African police and the army were called out every time blacks rose against apartheid laws that made their lives so miserable. In 1960, a group of unarmed blacks made their way to the police station in Sharpeville, a black township, to hold a peaceful protest against the passbook laws. No black in South Africa could travel, live, or work without a passbook. This hated document was the record of a person's life as defined by the white government. Thousands of demonstrators left their passbooks at home, expecting to be arrested. They thought this would show the government's policy could not continue if it had to arrest thousands. But the peaceful demonstration was met with gunfire. When it was over, 69 blacks were dead, shot in the back by the police as they tried to flee when the shooting began. Their deaths sparked a nationwide protest. The imprisoned Mandela became a powerful symbol of struggle and freedom. In you go, Mandela. Okay, you can come out now. All right. In 1976, the United Nations condemned apartheid, and international pressure began building against South Africa's racist policies. Free Nelson Mandela was a song that I heard growing up as a kid. There's another, along the time, because in the 80s, remember, we had Live Aid, and we had We Are the World, and we had all these things. And another one that came out during that time period was Artists Against Apartheid, and it was a bunch of different artists who made a record to raise money and to support Mandela and to end apartheid. And there's a resort town in South Africa called Sun City, and lots of people, famous artists, and people would play down there. And so that was boycotted, and they wrote a song called "I Ain't Gonna Play Sun City," and I remember that on MTV. And of course, U2 was in it. So there you go. If you could see their national sport, you might be less keen to see their cricket. Stop apartheid now. Join the Irish anti-apartheid movement. And again, it makes sense that the Irish are doing this since they fought for their own independence. We demand house security and comfort. Nelson Mandela must be set free. Apartheid is racism, the cancer du monde, the cancer of the world. Very nice. End apartheid. Bishop Desmond Tutu began convincing foreign nations and businesses to limit trade and investment. And this is what I was getting to a second ago. Boycotting apartheid. Tutu's efforts were designed to punish South Africa economically because, again, the only way to get a powerful country's attention is to hit them in the wallet. Unfortunately or unfortunately, it depends on how you feel about that. Look before you buy. Make sure it's not a product made in South Africa or a product of apartheid. End all sports ties with South Africa. Boycott South African goods. Boycott now because they were boycotting Coca-Cola, an American company, because they sold to South Africa. So again, you could, that's quite the ripple effect. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk, became president of South Africa. And in 1990, he legalized the ANC and released Mandela from prison. Peace does not fare well where poverty and deprivation reign. True. It does not flourish where there is ignorance and a lack of education and information. True. Repression, injustice, and exploitation are incompatible with peace. Peace is gravely threatened by fear and envy. Racial, class, and religious intolerance and prejudice are its moral enemies. The new era which is dawning will lift us out of the silent grief of our past. This is all so true. So true. And correctable. And you can parse that apart and look at the disparate pieces and see, like, where do you see each of those in America today, in Raleigh today, in Sanderson today, in Africa then, in Asia. I mean, you can see these things, and if you keep noticing, education keeps coming back. South Africa held a presidential election in '94 in which all races could vote in 1994, and Mandela is the president. In the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, created to help nation overcome abuses and violence, apartheid. So basically, what you're looking at now is, after almost 100 years, we've got to mend fences. We've got to start to come to the conclusion that, okay, this is what we did, in the Dutch, the English, whomever, and we shouldn't have, and this is what, so we need to make it right, basically. How they will help you. Those who did bad to them and witnesses can report their story to the TRC. Report the matter and tell the truth. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Victims of apartheid violence invited to share stories with government, and perpetrators of violence could testify and be pardoned of crimes. Name Eugene de Kock. Application of truth. Mr. de Kock, have you listed the crimes for which you're applying for amnesty? Yeah. In 2002, 53 African countries formed the AU, the African Union, focusing on economic, social, political, and environmental problems in Africa. Again, modeled after the EU, which was basically trying to do the same thing, is get Western Europe and all those countries that keep being, because Europe goes through, independence movements too when we get to, the 1990s. So those countries too join for economic stability and things of that sort. The goals of the African Union: achieve unity amongst countries, to defend the independence of the states, to promote peace, to promote and protect human people's rights, et cetera, et cetera. To work with relevant international partners in the eradication of preventable diseases. All of these are great, and all of these are accomplishable if leadership allows it. And Africa and African countries that struggle because of leadership. They don't struggle because of resources necessarily. They don't struggle because of infrastructure necessarily. They struggle because the leadership is not in a position to do anything about it, in my opinion. Despite progress in recent years, the effects of European colonization linger politically, economically, and ethnically in Africa. And they do, again, because when you don't, it's kind of analogous to Haiti from the after the fact standpoint. Oh, look, continuity, connections. But you can see in all these countries that I've discussed, you can see it in the assignments you did with some of the same countries, that the holes, the gaping holes fundamentally in infrastructure and in economic development, and then all the social reforms, not reforms, but all the social structures that are needed, the holes left by the former colonizer just put these countries at a disadvantage. And some have made more progress than others. Some have not. Some have regressed. So what to do about Africa, the continent, and the individual countries is a huge, huge question. And so it's one that we can talk about, or you can hopefully learn about later. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Africa. Now, again, you can't cover every country. We didn't get into Congo. We didn't talk about Rwanda. We didn't talk about Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. We didn't talk about, Somalia and other places. Senegal. We can go on and on and on. But let me go, I don't want to stare at John Green, but the legacy of colonization is still felt in Africa, and it's still felt to some degree in some of the Southeast Asian countries. And we'll see if there's a connection and some sort of continuity with respect to how the Southwest Asian and the West Asian, Afghanistan, places like that, develop once they gain independence as well. All right, so that's all for today. I will be recording over the weekend, and I'll be doing some other things. I'll see you in class tomorrow as we begin talking about the Middle East. And have a good night, and thank you very much.